السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعين به ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فهو المهتد ومن يضلل فلن تجد له وليا مرشدا. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله بلغ رسالته وأدى الأمانة ونصح الأمة وكشف الغمة وجاهد في سبيل الله حق جهاده حتى أتاه اليقين ونحن على ذلك من الشاهدين. أما بعد، فإن أحسن الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. أما بعد, جزاكم الله خير, my dear respect brothers and sisters, for joining in. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to bless our gathering and make our gathering for his sake bi'idhnillah ta'ala. Brothers and sisters, inshallah, we're going to be continuing our series to talk about the uh, the, the series that we started about 4 weeks ago, which talks about the source of reception and path of understanding Islam. And last week we started to talk about consensus and its importance and its levels and its authenticity. And subhanallah, alhamdulillah, I got a lot of good feedback from my brothers saying like how important that lecture was and how beneficial it was, because a lot of people did not know the importance of consensus and ijma'. Today, brothers and sisters, we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth about ijma', consensus, and its importance, because this is, brothers and sisters, this is an important issue that each and every average Muslims must understand. It's an important issue that each and every Muslim must understand. Okay, and why do we talk about consensus? Why is that? Because, brothers and sisters, this is the way. Consensus in our religion is considered to be one of the path of ways to understand our deen. We are what we call ourselves. We call ourselves Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah. We are the people of Sunnah and what? Jama'ah. There is consensus as one of the pathways that we authenticate what we believe is right or what is wrong. So it's important, brothers and sisters, to understand that ijma' or consensus is not something, a side issue. It's not something that is, if you believe in ijma' is great. If not, then you should be fine. No, we're going to be talking about also today that how can ijma' be a reason for people to be out of the millah? Can someone, it's very important, can someone leave the boundaries of Islam because he denies ijma'? It's possible. It's absolutely possible. So, brothers and sisters, we have to understand that. And the very first important thing that we have to understand as Muslims, that ijma', it's one of the pathways for us to understand our deen. This is the way we tend to authenticate our deen. Okay? And that's why you will see a lot of shubuhat, a lot of misconception and doubts that people are throwing against Islam nowadays is through the door of ijma', unfortunately. Through the door of ijma', because people did not understand ijma'. Okay? So, before I start to talk about the subject of ijma', there is a lot of, I want to quote to you a lot of sayings of some of the great scholars of Islam that talks about like how important ijma' is. For instance, let me show you, let me share with you the following. Ibn Hazm, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the great scholar of Islam, he said, Al-ijma'u قاعدة من القواعد الملة الحنيفية يرجع إليه ويفزع نحوه. That ijma' is considered to be one of the most important bases of Islam. Ijma' is considered one of the most important bases of Islam. Ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased, when he said, إن السلف كان يشتد إنكارهم على من خالف الإجماع. That the Salaf, our predecessors, they used to look down on any individual who did not go with ijma', who did not follow the ijma'. ويعدونه من أهل الزيغ والضلال, and anybody who did not follow the ijma', they would consider out of the people of misguidance. Imam al-Shafi'i, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what he said in his book كتابة الأم, he said, والعلم من وجهين اتباع واستنباط. He said knowledge are of two types. Okay, and he said that فإنه لم يكن فقول العامة سلفا لا نعرف أنه خلفت. That people said that it was known that people used to follow whatever the majority would go along. And there is an important saying, a letter that Sayyidina Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu have sent to whom? Shuraih al-Qadi. Look at this saying that authenticate the importance of ijma'. What he said, what Umar Khattab radiallahu anhu has said. He said, أنقضي بما في كتاب الله. He said, if you want to rule by the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Great. فإن لم يكن فبسنة رسول الله. If you cannot find anything in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then rule what? By the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. فإن لم يكن لا بكتاب ولا بسنة فقد بما قضى به الصالحون. He said, if you cannot find it in the sunnah nor in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then rule of what the righteous people have ruled. Meaning what? Ijma'. You see? So brothers and sisters, يعني, this is something that it's one of the pillars that we stand on to arrive at any most of the truth in Islam. Imam Shafi, that's why Imam Shafi, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what he said, من أراد بحبوحة الجنة فليلزم الجماعة. If anyone wants to be in Jannah, let him follow the ijma', let him follow the jama'ah, you know. So this is, brothers and sisters, yani, this is extremely important for us to realize the importance of ijma' and why ijma' is considered to be things, one of the most important, yani, after the door of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, ijma' comes as the way for us to authenticate things. So with that being said, I'm going to share with you the slides for today that we're going to be, what are we going to be, we're going to be talking about. So how, and this is kind of the stuff that we talked about last time, in which how do we authenticate, how do we know, what are some of the indications of what's some of the indications in the Quran and in the Sunnah that shows that consensus are important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said, وَكَذَلِكَ جَعَلْنَاكُمْ أُمَّةً وَسَطًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have made you a middle ummah. لِتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. You will be witnessing over all humanity. So if this ayah could not be practiced or be put in practicality unless Muslims follow the consensus, and that's what the scholars have said. There is, I mean, how could we be a middle ummah, and if each one of us is going to follow their own pathway, it's impossible. So therefore, we have to be a middle ummah, meaning that we have consensus among us that we follow. You know, so this is something that, yani, it's important. Also, brothers and sisters, you have to understand that and this is a side issue that I think it's worthwhile for us to pinpoint. Who are the very first people? Who are the very first people who went against ijma'? Who are they? The very first type of people, brothers and sisters, that went against ijma' are the Shia and the Khawarij, and the people who have uh, uh, translations of the Quran based on their liking. We call them al-Batiniyya. They would translate things out of the Quran out of their own desires or out of their own imagination. So in Imamiyya, the Shia, what they have done, because they wanted to translate things based on their own will, or based on their own desires. Like, for instance, one of the most vital issues that the Sunnah would differ with the Shia are over what? Over, for instance, the authenticity of Imamiyya. Like, where are the evidence that Imamiyya, or there is Imams in Islam? I mean, if you look at the Quran, there is no clear nas, there is no clear evidence in the Quran that authenticate the issue of Imamiyya. Nothing in the Quran. If it's such an essential issue, where do we find it in the Quran? Obviously, you cannot find it. And the same thing have happened to the Khawarij too. So, with that being, I mean, also of other evidences in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, ومن يشاقق الرسول من بعد ما تبين له الهدى ويتبع غير سبيل المؤمنين نوليه ما تولى ونصليه جهنم وساءت مصيرا. That who does not follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the way of the believers, then he should, he should be misguided, and he'll be thrown into the hellfire. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر. You are the best ummah that ever was brought into this earth. You will order what is right and you forbid what is wrong. So how this ayah can be put in practicality if we don't follow the consensus? The same kind of logic applies here. There have to be some sort of consensus that exists among the Muslims for this ayah to be applied. Obviously, the ayah before it that talks about وَمَا يُشَقِّقُ الرَّسُولِ, that's a clear evidence that goes along with consensus, that we must follow the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and we must follow the way of the believers. So, this is something important, brothers and sisters, that we have to understand how we authenticate things out of the Quran and the Sunnah. So with these few evidences shows that there is no way for someone to leave or disregard the issue of ijma', especially when you have يعني ahadith like Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he said لا تجتمع أمتي على ضلالة, that my ummah, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, my ummah does not unify over misguidance. So this is again another clear evidence that shows that consensus is an essential part of our deen. Okay. Now the question here, brothers and sisters, that what are the types of consensus? Like, for instance, this is again something not a whole lot of people or not a whole lot of Muslims understand. What are the types of consensus? Okay. Not all consensus are the same. Like, for instance, there is one type of consensus that we call قطعي and ظني, like a consensus that is definitive and consensus that is presumptive. What is the difference between these two? A consensus that is definitive, meaning that the scholars have said that such ruling or such rule in Islam, and they all of them agreed on, like out openly, the scholars have said this is clear, and the scholars have agreed on. For instance, يعني, part of that, most of the scholars have agreed on. Okay, this is something what we call definitive. Presumptive, that some of the scholars have made their opinion on certain subject, and no other scholars have objected against them. This is a presumptive, وظني. Okay, so obviously القطعي or the definitive ijma' is considered to be of a higher level. The highest level of ijma' is what we call definitive consensus, in which that all of the scholars have made opinion on it and all of them agreed on it. Okay. The second one is some scholars have made uh, opinion on a subject, but there was no one who objected against them. Okay. Another type of consensus, is what we call silent consensus and explicit consensus. This is just the way it sounds, meaning that when you have uh, affirmative consensus, meaning that the scholars have spoke about it. Silent consensus is when some scholars have spoke about it and others were silent or they did not say anything against it. It's almost the same kind of a different type of way of classifying consensus. And this type of classification is based on whoever have said and whoever kept quiet. And the other one, the one I mentioned, that is presumptive versus definitive, is based on strength, based on strength. Okay, but some, as you notice, some aspects are they share among both of them. Okay, but it's important for us to kind of know the types of consensus that exist. Again, for the sake of clarity, there are two ways that we could classify the consensus. One, by strength, uh, and we would say there are two types: definitive and presumptive. The definitive, in which that all the scholars have spoke about it and all of them agreed. Presumptive, some scholars have spoke about that subject, and and there was no others who said anything against it. Okay, if you based on another type of classifying it is based on whoever said and whoever was quiet. We call them affirmative or silent. The affirmative people, the scholars have spoke about it, and affirmative or the silent people, some scholars have said something against it, about it, but did not, but no others have disagreed on it. Okay, why is it important? Why is it beneficial for us to have consensus? Why? Because, brothers and sisters, this is the way we prove that something is definitive. A ruling in Islam is definitive. This is the way that we show that we have a solid evidence. And this is the way that we could make sure that we have the correct understanding. And that's alhamdulillah Rabbil Azim, brothers and sisters, that's what distinguish Ahl Sunnah and Jama'ah in Islam from other religions. And if like for instance, you'll see, all sort of, and when it comes to essential things in Islam, essential things in Islam, there is a unification among all of the essential things in Islam. But when you talk about the essential things in other religions, you see all sort of differences in opinions. I want to make this clear, you know. So why ijma' or consensus is important? Because that's the way we prove things. This is the way we make sure that we have solid evidence of things. This is the way we make sure that we have correct understanding of certain things, certain rulings. Okay, so that's why it's important for us to support or believe that consensus is very important. Okay. Now, how could we know? How could we know that this is? And if we talked about one of the highest levels of ijma' is what we call definitive consensus. Okay, how do we know that we have reached that? Okay, the scholars, they said, by for instance, you have one of the few things the ruling over that evidence is known by religion as a necessity, and it's something that is essential in our deen. Second thing is it's mutawatir, when we talked about the issue of tawatur in the past, meaning that it have been transmitted to us through many people saying the same thing. Okay, and lastly, the consensus of the consensus that scholars have repeatedly reported from different sects and different countries, meaning that pretty much all the all the even people come from different opinions, all of them supported that issue. Okay, so this is again, we talked about, this is the highest level of consensus, and if this is that, here we're talking about the essential things that exist within Islam. Okay, all right. So now we'll move into the next subject, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, the basis of consensus. Okay, brothers and sisters, according to scholars, consensus is how do we reach consensus? How do we extract that? How can we build our argument to reach the consensus? Is mainly based on the evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay, based on evidences from the Quran and Sunnah. But the scholars can reach consensus on matters that are that can be based on interpretation from the Quran and the Sunnah. Okay, like based on ijtihad. So is it possible that consensus can be reached based on ijtihad, like based on research from the scholars and effort from the scholars to reach that? Of course it can. And there's a lot of things, and there's a lot of issues that the scholars have reached on and have consensus on, even though there is not direct evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah that indicate that. And let me give you an example. And here we're talking about not here we're talking about trying to extract meanings from the Quran and the Sunnah, and the scholars have reached that consensus. Let me give you an example. Like for instance, we talked about one of the classes that we give talks about when the water become najis, when the water become dirty. Okay, and we said, when the water smell, or its taste or its color would change, it would become, and if have touched these one of these things have changed by something that is dirty or najis, then the water is no longer cleansing, or no longer tahir. Okay, so where do we get that ruling? Is there a direct ayah or direct evidence from the Sunnah that indicate? No, but this was extracted from understanding of people that was carried on to us through generations. Okay, there are some bases to it, but it was based on interpretation that was extracted from many scholars and many indirect sayings that we inherited over the years. Okay, I mean this is something, again consensus that was reached, but not based on direct evidence. Okay, the next question here, brothers and sisters, that we need to talk about. And this is very important. Okay, this is يعني, if there is something that I want to make sure that you guys understand is this part. Okay, if someone goes against the general consensus, are they kuffar? And here, this is very, very important. Okay, very, very important issue. If someone goes against the jama'ah, if someone goes against the jama'ah, are they considered to be kuffar? Okay, now how can we answer this question? So what does the scholars they said? What did the scholars they said? They said if someone violated a consensus over essential issues in Islam, then yes, they have went beyond the boundary of Islam. They became kuffar. Okay. Like for instance, if someone tells us, well, Maghrib is not, it's not 3 rak'ahs, or someone would tells you that zina is halal, or someone would tells you that we only have 4 pillars of Islam, or someone would tell you Dhuhr is 3 rak'at, something like that. Here we're talking about essential things in Islam. If someone have violated uh, 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 essential things in Islam that have consensus on, obviously they have went beyond the boundary of Islam. This is very, very important, brothers and sisters. Because yeah, for instance, you have some people nowadays, they would say, well, zina is not really someone sleeping with a girl. Zina can be. This is if you rape a woman, for instance. They would say, if you rape a woman, this would consider to be zina, adultery. But if you have a mutual understanding between a man and a woman, that's not considered to be zina. If anyone who said this is obviously someone have went beyond the boundary of Islam. They have left Islam by that saying. If a sister who comes along and would say there is no hijab, she have left the boundary of Islam. Because here we're talking about essential things in Islam. Essential things in Islam. Things that have clear evidence. يعني نص واضح عن صريح. There is a clear evidence in Islam. Then obviously, they have went beyond the boundary of Islam. Like for instance, but if someone have disagreed over other type of consensus that are not essential, then we have to evaluate which consensus that they have violated. Like for instance, is the issue essential or non-essential? Is the issue have clear evidence, clear nas in the Quran and the Sunnah or not? And based on that, we would measure whether of a type or the degree of the sin that they are committing. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to always make us among from Ahl al-Jama'ah. Amin ya Rabbil Alameen. Okay? So this is very, very important subject, brothers and sisters, because a lot of people nowadays they take the issue of consensus lightly, and unfortunately, because of that, their decision, they could lift the boundary of Islam because of that mistake that they have done. Okay? Now, is anyone, and the other question here, brothers and sisters, can anyone say, Wallahi, I disagree with the scholars of Ijma'? Can anyone come and say, Wallahi, I disagree? No, of course not. And who can we consider as the scholars who are, have the qualification for them to say that they disagree with consensus? Obviously, there have to be scholars who are an expert in that field, scholars who have known to have the qualification to make ijtihad, scholars that are well respected and well known within the ummah. Okay, so if you have scholars, again, brothers and sisters, you have to understand that even within Islam, you have different subspecialties. You have the people of fiqh, you have the people of hadith, you have the people of Quran. So there are different levels and different subspecialization. You have people who know more about finances. You have more people who know about waqi' al-ummah, or the that al-muamalat, or dealings that are contemporary. You see, not all of them are the same levels. So if someone you have, for instance, come out of nowhere, like for instance, if someone is an expert in PlayStation, okay, and tell you, wallahi, this is subject is I disagree on. no, we're not gonna say we're not gonna take whatever he says. If something come out of nowhere and tells you, and maybe he's an expert or of a certain field, and then because the same thing, the same science can be applied on other sciences. Like for instance, you're not going to see uh, a mathematician would make an educated opinion over an issue of medicine. And the same thing, you're not going to see a doctor would make a rational opinion over an issue of on physics or math. You see, people from the same field and even subspecialties within that field can make an educated guess or an educated opinion over that matter. Okay, and the other people can respectively be rejected. Okay, so this is very important that we have to know. Everybody have to know his status and where they stand. Okay, and not everybody is the same. For someone who have been rightly educated, rightly educated, and know their Quran and know their Sunnah and then know their ahadith and know the ahkam and know the meaning of these verses and why they were revealed. Is it like someone who was who self-taught himself? Of course not. Of course not. Okay. One of the other issue is that many people tend to cast doubt on is they say, well, ya akhi, is ijma' is it possible? Is it possible for us to have ijma'? And that's unfortunately some of the people who they want to cast doubt over Islam and Muslims. They say it's impossible. And sometimes they would give you a saying of Imam Ahmad, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him. He said, من ادعى الإجماع فهو كاذب. Whoever said that there is ijma', he's a liar. So first of all, you have to know what's the 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 context of that. Okay, Imam Ahmad, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, he said that in the context is that there are ijma' among all of the misguided groups at his time. He did not say about the ijma' of the ummah. He was talking about the ijma' of the misguided groups in his time. But Imam Ahmad, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, he said that and made rulings based on ijma' many times. And he said that and many times he said there is no people. If you notice his fatwa, he would say no one have differed on us on this subject, or people there is no scholars who differed on this subject, and he made rulings based on ijma'. So no one can say this is something that Imam Ahmad have said about consensus. Obviously, they don't know what they're talking about. So let's see, for the sake of argument, what are the possibilities? So the number one possibility, the possibility of having, ijma' at any time. That's number one possibility. The other possibility, when you have possibility of consensus at one time, but not at other time. That's another possibility. The third possibility, when you have consensus that never occurs. Okay, we as Muslims, I think that the most correct opinion is that we say there is ijma' at any time, and this is something that we're witnessing. That, for instance, when it comes to the most essential things in Islam, there are consensus that exist at all time. Whether it was at the time of the Sahaba or at nowadays, our contemporary days. Well, like for instance, when it comes to Salah, when it comes to Arkan al-Islam, when it comes to Arkan al-Iman, when it comes to what is the main things that are known, halal and haram, is zina halal or haram, or is khamr or wine halal or haram. These basic things that even a child would know, these things are all of them have consensus on. So there is no issues when it comes to these things. So yes, consensus is possible and can be at any time. Okay. The next subject, brothers and sisters, let's address some of the doubts that people tend to cast over ijma'. The very first or the most common doubt that people would say about ijma', they're saying, well, ijma' is it's against people research or ijtihad. Ijma' is against people being creative. So for anybody who make these claims, They don't absolutely, they don't know what they're talking about, because Islam, in its essence, is based on it fuels and it promotes uh, creativity, and it promotes ijtihad. Like for يعني, a common example that يعني, that there is ijma' on nowadays. Like for instance, when we talk about, when we talk basic subject, like for instance, when we say what is the ruling, what is the ruling of common things that would negate your siyam or your fasting. Like for instance, uh, inhalers. Okay, there is ijma' among the ummah that inhalers, okay, have can affect your can affect, it cannot affect your siyam. Okay, so or etc. So yeah, there is a lot of things that yeah, it's known within Islam, that whether it's affect our siyam, all the contemporary things, all the contemporary things that when it comes to siyam, yeah, common things when it comes to siyam, whether yeah, for instance, uh, um, uh, what is the ruling of eye drops, what is the ruling of nose, yeah, there are consensus among the ummah of what the ruling of these things. Okay, so يعني, yes, different times have different needs different fatawa, and Islam promotes that. It's not against that, but even after the scholars think and analyze, there has to be, or we should look into whether there is ijma' over that subject or not. Simple, very simple. Okay, so Islam, and to answer in response uh, to that claim, yes, Islam promotes creativity and promotes ijtihad. Okay. The second thing is, like, the issue of people raising doubts. Well, there is no ijma. Well, there is. Just like we just spoke about a minute ago. There are ijma. There are ijma, and then there's going to be, as Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, يعني, وما زالت طائفة من أمتي. And the hadith that talks about there is still a tribe in my ummah that is in the haqq until the day of judgment, meaning that there's to continue going to be people who follow Islam, people who are in ijma' and etc. So the issue of ijma', when people misuse the quotation of Imam Ahmad radiallahu anhu, من ادعى الإجماع فقد كذب, that whoever says that there is ijma' he's a liar. This is again out of context, and this is in reference to the people or misguided groups at his times. Okay, let us give us some examples. I know we're going to end with this, but what are some of the examples, yeah, of ijma' that Muslims have agreed on? For instance, when someone laughs during prayer, okay, laughter in prayer invalidates prayer. Okay, taking a jizya from the non-Muslims, there is ijma' on it. A disbeliever cannot be a wali of his Muslim daughter. There is ijma' on the subject. Here we're just giving you guys example. Having more than one wife, or having more than four wives is not possible, or haram for anyone. So all these simple things. There are like there is books and books and books that talks about what's Islam, or what Muslim scholars have made ijma' on, and it's not an issue that we need to discuss here. This is something for someone who wants to dig through this and needs more details. There are many books, alhamdulillah, that exist about this. But the issue here, brothers, is to show you evidences, that there are indeed ijma'. Okay. So this is what, inshallah, what I have for you for today. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I hope that this is makes it clear for all of us of how important that ijma' is, and how is it an essential part of our deen, and how is if someone have rejected ijma', what could happen to them, and there is obviously disastrous effect of that. This could take you out of the boundary of Islam. And we talked about it. We described the types of ijma', whether it was qat'i or dhanni, presumptive or definitive, or whether it was based on people saying, what is it affirmative or silent, salty, قولي. So this another types of way that we could classify it. And alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin, also we talked about how can we what is in the Quran and Sunnah that talks about ijma. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin, we showed this. And finally we talked about and we answered, is it possible for have to ijma? And lastly we talked about what are some of the examples of ijma. So jazakumullah khair, brothers and sisters, for your time. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to guide us and show us the pathway. And if there's any questions, I would love to answer them bidnillah ta'ala, because this is an essential issue. And if somebody have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them bidnillah ta'ala. Is there any questions? Okay. I think we have someone listening to us. Nemo, do you have any question, brother? Do you have any questions? Okay. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. خير إن شاء الله. جزاكم الله خير. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.